Greetings fellow gorehounds and welcome back to another Blood Splattered vlog. But before we get to the vlog proper, I want to first mention that I, the horror guru, will be attending Son of Monsterpalooza this weekend, September 15th through 17th. So if you want to come out and see me in the flesh and happen to be in the Los Angeles Burbank area, then come on out to Son of Monsterpalooza and let's have a good time. And with that all said, my fellow gorehounds, let us move on to the vlog. So this week I'm reviewing a movie that was recommended to me by a bunch of fans, and it's this Australian horror thriller called Berlin Syndrome, which is a very interesting title, and going into the movie I was legit curious as to what the title was about, because I knew next to nothing about the film. All I knew was what it said on the Netflix description, that a woman has a one-night stand with a guy in Germany and then things go horribly wrong. Beyond that, I knew nothing, so I was like, okay, Syndrome, is this supposed to be some sort of like killer disease movie? Is this supposed to be about someone who goes crazy? What is the Berlin Syndrome in this movie's context? Now, I'm not going to go into what the actual title means until we get to the spoilers, but needless to say, the movie does explain itself in a very satisfactory way. And by that I mean it doesn't do it with the explainies, it does it by showing you what the title is about. But more than that, I think this is a really solid horror thriller. It's got some great characters and some great writing and some really intense, like, just fucked up moments. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of artsy filler in this movie, a little too much for my taste, just a whole lot of sequences that are done with this like slow motion montage kind of feel, but they're not really giving you any new information as the scene goes on. They just feel like they're extending the running time unnecessarily or trying to set some sort of mood. And while yeah, the movie does succeed in having a very grim mood, I do not think the slow motion shots necessarily contributed to that. In fact, honestly, I feel like a lot of those sequences took away from the movie because I started to get a little bored. But once this movie got to the nitty-gritty, once it got going and it became clear what this movie was about, that's when the movie gets really damn good. And it has like this really great writing technique where it brings back everything that happens in the first half of the movie, but it has a completely new and sinister context in the second half. I can't exactly go into what I mean by that until we get to the spoilers, but hopefully that makes sense. All the acting in this movie is pretty believable. The lead especially, you find yourself really endeared to over the course of the film. And to a certain extent, you also find yourself endeared to the villain because the writing is so nuanced that it shows you all the layers of why he is the way he is. But yeah, ultimately I like this movie. I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. If you're not into slow-paced foreign films, then you're probably going to be bored over the course of this film. But that being said, if you like a good character study, this movie does a really good job of examining both of its leads. You get to know just about every aspect of them and why they are the way they are and why things happen the way they happen in the movie, as fucked up as it gets. And that's another thing. This movie is one of those movies that's more brutal than it is scary, though it is scary, but like in a different way than like a ghost story. This movie is way more about the feeling of inevitable dread than something like jump scares. Oh yeah, and one more thing before we go to the spoilers. This movie does indeed have an off-screen assumed dog death, so if animal deaths are a thing that bug you, you might want to skip this one. And with that said, let's move on to the spoilers. Alright, I can finally take the gloves off and start talking about the nitty-gritty of this movie. Basically, this movie opens up with this girl Claire, who's an Australian girl who's visiting Berlin. And while her family knows that she's there, it's very obvious that she's up to a whole bunch of things that she doesn't want her family to know about. Like she's staying up late and partying with a bunch of South Africans at the beginning of the movie on this rooftop. And during the day, when she's in the middle of taking all these photographs of all the awesome architecture of Berlin, she ends up meeting this guy Andy, and the two of them end up hitting it off. But despite him being very charming, she doesn't sleep with him right away. She gets right to the threshold of about to sleep with him, but then backs off. But then the next day, she ends up looking for him again, realizing that, hey, she kind of did like him, and they end up hooking up and finally having sex in a semi-erotic fashion. And I say semi-erotic because the scene, while also emphasizing the kind of erotic nature of hooking up with a one-night stand in Berlin, it also heavily emphasizes the awkwardness of sleeping with someone you just met for the first time. As well as the awkwardness of, oh no, I shouldn't be doing this is dangerous, but that's kind of turning me on. And so that happens, but then she wakes up the next day and the door is locked. And there's no way for her to leave the apartment because it's up a couple stories, so she can't just climb out the window. So she says, fuck it, I'll just wait here until he gets back and ask him if he accidentally forgot to leave the key. Meanwhile, we learn a little bit about Andy, and it turns out he's actually an English teacher at one of the local high schools. And right away, we know something's not right because he's not entirely truthful to his coworkers about what he's going to be doing that night. He implies that he's going to be going out and having a date with some sort of girl without actually indicating the fact that he has a girl waiting for him at home. And while that's a small thing, there really is no reason for him to lie about this, so it's enough to get you going like, something might not be right with this guy, especially since he locked the door and didn't leave a key. So eventually Andy comes home, and at first Claire finds it oddly romantic. Like, oh, you wanted me to stay, so you kept me locked in so you can have another night with me. Oh, well, that's cute. I will definitely sleep with you again.
Definitely sleep with you again.
And so she does, and they even go out and party a little bit. But then they get back to the apartment, and she wakes up the next morning, and the door is locked one more time. But even more so, he actually did leave a key, and the key doesn't work in the lock. So she freaks out, kind of finally realizing that, oh fuck, this guy might have actually abducted me without me realizing it, so I'm gonna smash this window open and start screaming. But there's a problem with this plan. It turns out he double paned the windows so that there's literally like bulletproof glass blocking her from breaking it down. And on top of that, there's no one else living in this apartment complex, so they are completely and utterly alone. No one can hear her. Also, I'm pretty sure the double pane glass was a little soundproof, because every time she screams and someone is outside, they can't hear a thing. And so this is the point of the movie where everything that was once charming and handsome about the guy is now sinister and disturbing and kind of freaky. For example, during the first time they had sex, he went down on her and indicated to her that it's okay for her to scream in ecstasy because no one's gonna hear her. And in the moment, that felt kind of sexy, it felt kind of dirty, it felt kind of hot. But when he comes home and she starts freaking out on him and screaming for someone to try to help her, and he says, no one can hear you scream, all of a sudden something that was hot or romantic or sexy is now completely sinister and intimidating and oh fuck. And the movie keeps doing this over the course of it. Things that happen between the two of them at the beginning of the movie end up coming back at the end of the movie, and you start to realize, oh shit, this was all part of one fucked up plan of this one character. For example, at the beginning of the movie, he would often use the wrong word. He would use a word that sounded like the word he wanted to use, and it would indicate that, oh, English is his second language, he's not very good at it, and it would be kind of cute and kind of charming and kind of adorable. But later on, when you find out that A, he's an English teacher, and B, this isn't the first person he's done this to, and C, he's gonna do it to another person after her, we see him using that same trick on a new girl, and all of a sudden, the audience reaction to it is completely different. Now it's all of a sudden like, oh shit, this is fucking scary. Whereas before, like I said, it was charming. And I've got to commend the writers for doing a really good job of keeping that up throughout the entirety of the movie's running time. So for the next portion of the movie, we have a bunch of scenes of Claire trying to find ways to escape or get away from Andy. For example, at one point she finds a screwdriver and ends up stabbing his hand with a screwdriver and running out the door. But then he catches up to her and breaks her hand and drags her back inside, and her hand is broken for the rest of the movie. Because what's he gonna do, take her to the hospital? No, she's gonna stay with a broken hand in his apartment for as long as he wants her to be there. And while this is all going on, there's also a subplot between Andy and his father. Because it turns out his father is really old and on his way out, and seems really disappointed in Andy and his direction in life. Like, he's very happy that his son followed in his footsteps and became a teacher like he is, but he's very disappointed that his son hasn't gotten married yet, that he hasn't had kids. And so he's constantly prying his son about his love life, and his son is always telling him about these girls that he's bringing home, and then talking about them as if they're his girlfriends, but they're not, they're people he's literally kidnapped. But it becomes very clear how psychologically this works for Andy, because we learn about how his mother abandoned them when the wall fell. And so him keeping these girls around is kind of his weird way of getting back at his mother for leaving him as a kid. So yeah, this is another horror movie about a psychopath with mommy issues. That just seems to be par for the course. But that doesn't explain a lot of the weird shit he does to these girls when they're trapped with him. For example, on that second morning when she woke up, she found herself with a tattoo on her shoulder that is mine in German. He basically brands her as his while she's asleep. And on top of that, he's taking all these weird photographs of her when she's not conscious and putting them in this weird, like, binder. And later on in the movie, when Claire's snooping around the apartment, she ends up finding more binders with more women. But I suppose it's about this point in time where I should start talking about why this movie is called Berlin Syndrome. Well, the answer to that is simple. It's a play on Stockholm Syndrome. Because as this movie escalates, as things get worse and worse for Claire, she starts to essentially fall for Andy. Not in the true, like, love sense, but in the, like, well, we're stuck together and you're the only person I have, and so I'm going to willingly sleep with you and I'm going to do everything you want, and we are gonna be a happy family together. And Andy ends up getting into this too, because once his father passes away and he spends like a week away from her and she like starves alone in his apartment, he comes back and gives her his father's dog. But this kind of shows the fucked up psychology of Andy, because the more attached to the dog she became, the more jealous he became of the dog, so eventually he just kills the dog. And so Claire gets closer to Andy, but then as Claire gets closer to Andy, Andy starts getting more detached from Claire. And the ultimate escalation of this is when he finally decides to take her outside. And at this point, you're like, oh, he's finally taking her outside. Maybe he trusts her finally. But no, he takes her out into the woods and it looks like he's gonna chop her head off with an axe. But she is saved because of a bunch of kids that just happen to be in the woods and stumble across them. But Claire, realizing that this kid is a connection to the outside world, tries to tell the kid that, help me, he's got me captive. But unfortunately for her, the kid doesn't understand English. But thankfully, because of this, Andy decides not to kill Claire and takes her back to the apartment. Now, alongside this whole Andy and Claire plot, another subplot has taken the place of the father subplot. And this secondary subplot is this one student at the school that Andy teaches at that Andy is infatuated with. And to a certain extent, the student is infatuated with him too, because she kind of wants to jump all over his bones. But he's like, no, I can't do this with a local girl, much less one of my students. I might get caught. But we have this brief scene where she shows up at his apartment with the assumed intention of sleeping with him. But when the door opens, she sees Claire in the background with a towel on. Just a towel, because she just took a shower. So Andy tells her that Claire is his girlfriend and that she is a harlot for even throwing herself out there like that. But Claire remembers this exchange. She remembers it very well. She remembers it so well that one night when Andy is grading his student's homework, Claire distracts him by intentionally burning her hand on the stove so that he has to go out and get some sort of ointment for her. And while he's out of the room, she finds the homework of the girl he was infatuated with and inserts one of the fucked up pictures he took of her being held captive, so that when the girl gets her homework the next day, she realizes, oh shit, that girl that he said was his girlfriend? He has her bound and tied in his apartment. She is a fucking victim. So the high school girl runs out of class immediately and just gets on her bike and books it straight to the apartment complex. But she drops the picture on the way and the teacher finds it and realizes, oh shit, I'm gonna get caught. So he runs back, and this leads to the finale of the movie, in which I am gonna leave for all of you to find out what happens. Yes, I know, Horror Guru, you always spoil the whole movie except for the ending. What's up with that? Well, deal with it. I want you all to watch these movies, especially when I like them, so I'm not going to give you the whole damn thing so you can ignore the damn movie. So if anything I have said so far tickles your fancy, then be sure to check out Berlin Syndrome for yourself. It is currently available on Netflix Instant Watch. And with that all said, my fellow Gorehounds, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so that you're notified of my videos immediately upon their upload. And as always, my fellow Gorehounds, peace out, and I'll catch y'all later.